Hey guys, this is Dak and Farmer with TBT Reviews, and today, for my first video, we're going to be looking at the self-titled debut record from Theory of a Deadman, released on September 17th, 2002. Now before we get into the album, we're going to look into a little bit of Theory of a Deadman's background. They're a band from Delta, British Columbia, who formed in 2001 with the original members Tyler Connolly on lead guitar and lead vocals, Dave Brenner on rhythm guitar and backing vocals, Dean Back on bass, and Tim Hart on the drums. Now, really to start out, I think it's safe to say that Theory of a Deadman has gotten a bit of a bad rap, and most of this has been due to their involvement with Nickelback's lead singer and lead guitarist, Chad Kroeger. Now, Chad kind of helped get this group off their feet and really got their first album, really got it going, because he actually co-produced this album with Joey Moi, who is also of Nickelback fame, and he actually wrote some of the songs with Tyler Connolly. He took part in some of the lyrical writing. So it's safe to say that this album probably does have that Nickelback flavor, and this is likely due to Nickelback's Chad Kroeger's influence on the album and his lyrical, writings and such. So I guess we're going to kick this off with track number 1. We have Invisible Man. This track was featured on the Spider-Man 1 soundtrack in 2002, and that's probably also another, it's probably what got this album selling from the start, was its including in the soundtrack. Now, Invisible Man is a track that sits at just under 3 minutes. It's a kind of like your standard fare rocker. It does have that Nickelback flavor to it. And overall, I think I'd have to give it a 6 out of 10. It's not something that really stands out on the album. It's not that crazy opener that you'd really hope for, but it gets the job done. Moving on, we have track number 2, which is Nothing Could Come Between Us. This is the first single released off the album, and it was released, I think, slightly just before the album was released anyways, probably a couple weeks in advance. And you know what? From the start, I wasn't really a big fan of this song. This is one of the songs on the record, and probably the only song on the record, that I don't think actually really fits their sound. I don't think as if Tyler Connolly sounds like Tyler Connolly on this track. And it's kind of just your typical radio rocker, and I'd probably have to give it a 5 out of 10. Now, this album did start out kind of disappointingly for me, but moving on to track number 3, Make Up Your Mind, I think my mind was really made up here. You know what? That Theory of a Deadman was a band with tons of potential. The second single released off this album, Make Up Your Mind, was, when I first heard it, honestly, my favorite song. When this song was first released, it was my favorite song at the time. And to this day, the song still does hold a lot of true meaning with me, not lyrically, but the music, I don't know, the music touched me in a way that most of their other songs haven't so far. And due to that nostalgic attachment and the fact that I think this is a truly nicely structured song, I'd have to give it a 10 out of 10. Moving on, we have Point to Prove. Now this is another one of the tracks on the album that is co-penned by Kroeger. And, another one, I'm not really a big fan of it. It is your standard fare rocker, and doesn't really seem to go anywhere. So I'd have to give Point to Prove a 5 out of 10. Next up, we have Leg to Stand On. Now this, I don't want to say has a Western vibe to it, but it almost has that, when you think of it, you think, musically, it sounds like a horse trotting through a desert. It has that Western feel to it, but it's not really a country riff per se. And this is another one that Chad Kroeger helped write. The verse is kind of interesting. They have a breakdown, and they're just kind of repeating, you haven't got it, you haven't got it, you haven't got a leg to stand on. The lyrics in this one aren't really great, but musically I think it's not something that shines, but it's average. It's pretty good. So for that, I'm going to have to give it a 6.5 out of 10. Now, so far the album, in my point of view, has been somewhat average aside from Make Up Your Mind. It's not something that really stands out. But when you get to tracks like What You Deserve, track number 6, this is when the album really kicks in. And supposedly, this track actually features Default drummer. Default is another one of Chad Kroeger's proteges, by the way. He actually features Danny Craig, their drummer, on this track. And he does add a bit of a different flavor, but it still kind of sounds like, typical Theory of a Deadman. Musically, the riff is kind of interesting, and they're using their typical drop B, Nickelback-esque riffing. But in this song, it really works. I think it works. And I quite like this track. So I'm probably going to have to give this track an 8 out of 10. Next up, we have The Last Song, which was the final and fourth single released from this album. and wasn't really something that really grabbed me. This was supposed to be the track to break Theory of a Deadman into the mainstream, and I think it did its job, but it really didn't do anything more than get them a little more popular, because I wasn't a big fan of this song. It does have that radio appeal, and it's just a little monotonous and average. Another track that I'm going to have to give a 5 out of 10. We get to track number 8, which is Say I'm Sorry. And this song really isn't that bad. It has a bit of a different flavor. It doesn't sound much like the other songs on the album. It's one, I think it's around 3.5 minutes. It's a pretty good tune. I'm going to have to give it a 7 out of 10. Moving on, we have track number 9, which is Any Other Way. Another one that Chad helped write. Goodness, he has had a lot to do with this album. So we're probably going to get a lot of hate for it. And this album has, like I said before, gotten its fair share of hate. And it's likely because of Chad's includement. What the fuck am I saying? Anyways, on to track 9, Any Other Way. It kind of has a similar riff to What You Deserve, so I'm automatically, kind of inclined to like it because I thought that was a pretty good song. Now, with Any Other Way, towards the end it kind of drags on a little bit. This is actually one of the longer tracks on the album. It comes close to the 4-minute mark. And, aside from having a pretty good riff or whatever, it does kind of drag on, so I can't really give it a great score, but I'm going to have to give this track a 7.5 out of 10. Moving on, and this is the standard edition of the album, by the way. So moving on to the final and 10th track, we have Confession. Now for this song, they actually use a different tuning. My goodness. They're creative. What? Theory of a Deadman creative. They include Chad Kroeger. How are they creative? Well, they actually changed up the tuning on this one. They usually use drop B tuning, but in this one they used drop C. What an advancement. Anywho, for a closer track, this is probably slightly above average. It's pretty good. It's got a really catchy chorus. Your typical radio rocker that's got a good chorus going on for it. And, ultimately, the album closes off on a bit of a higher note than it starts, in my opinion. So, I'm going to have to give Confession a 7 out of 10. Now, this album as a whole kind of captivated me as a kid. Dad downloaded a few of the tracks, and that's what introduced me to this band. I was just I think it was a little 5-year-old who just sat around listening to Nothing Could Come Between Us and Make Up Your Mind and all that, and then I kind of explored off onto my own little trail of the rest of their discography. Thanks, Dad, by the way. And, overall, this album, not really, it was kind of like slightly above average, but it's not something I find myself coming back to very often. When I do, though, it is a bit of an enjoyment when you're, avoiding tracks like The Last Song and, Point to Prove. Sometimes even Invisible Man. Like I said, for me, that wasn't really an impressive opener. But now I want to know what you guys think. I think that I'm going to give this album a 67 out of 100. But that's not that bad. That's almost a 3.5 star out of 5. We're not looking at a terrible release here, but we're not looking at something that's raising the roof or anything, per se. But I want to know what you guys think about this album, so leave it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to this channel because we have more reviews on their way. This was Theory of a Deadman self-titled release, Theory of a Deadman. This is TBT Reviews. Dak and Farmer. Have a good day.